Hi, I'm Seth Tuller, one of the co-directors of the Boston Project Center for IQPs. The other co-director, Paul Matheson, is in the Environmental and Civil Engineering Department. And in this presentation, we'd like to introduce you to the Boston Project Center, the kinds of projects we do, why Boston is a good choice for an IQP, and how the program works, some of the logistical information that you would need to know. So the first point is that Boston can be a really great choice for a project center because you get to do meaningful projects with state and local government agencies and non-governmental organizations. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those are in a minute. It's also a commuter-based project center, which means that you get the off-campus experience for an IQP, but with little cost. So the idea is that you would live in the Worcester area, where you would normally be living during the academic year, and that you would commute into Boston on the commuter rail a few days a week to work with your sponsors and do your field work. The advantage of that, aside from the cost and from being able to continue to live in Worcester, is that you're able to meet with the sponsors during the preparation phase of the project, and actually you see a lot of them during the project as well. You also get a chance to explore a really vibrant city with a long history, and we make some efforts to introduce the students to different themes along those lines through walking tours and Boston Harbor Tour and other activities. And if you're interested in staying in New England after you graduate and looking for a job, Boston's a great place to work. It was rated one of the best cities for finding a job. You know, its population tends to be on the younger side with all the other universities there. So it's an exciting place to live and to work. And it's an exciting place to get to explore during an IQP. There's a lot of things that we do. We do Boston Harbor tours, and you can see in some of these pictures, we take walking tours along some of the more historical areas. But we also do some walking tours that introduce students to some of the less visible, off the beaten track kinds of sites, and some with an engineering focus. So the canals, how the Big Dig was done. If you know Boston history, you know, instead of there being an underground highway through the middle of town, there was an elevated highway, and it was quite an engineering feat to put it underground. There's also beautiful Boston Harbor. As I mentioned, if you like sports, we're there during baseball season. And it's a great city for walking on both the Boston side and the Cambridge side, and some really great museums as well. So the way that the program works in Boston is, as I said, it's a commuter-based project center. And we've been doing this since 2013 to give students a low-cost choice of a project center, but an exciting and meaningful experience of doing off-campus projects. So the projects themselves are an A term, which means that the preparation phase is in D term preceding that A term. Then you have a summer break. So during the D term preparation phase, you'd be taking the course ID 2050, and you'd be doing the PQPs. And this is the time during which you get to learn about your sponsor and the motivation for the project. You'll probably also have a chance to certainly talk with your project sponsor, perhaps multiple times, but also if you had the time and your team had the time, you could go to Boston and you could meet with them as well. And you develop a project proposal. So what are the advantages in doing the projects in Boston is a lot of opportunity to interact with the sponsors during the preparation phase, which is unlike a lot of the other project centers. So like I said, then you get the summer off, then you come back in A term and you start working on the project. And generally the way it works is students or the teams would commute on the commuter rail into Boston a few days a week. There's some ebbs and flows to that depending on the timing of the term. So at the beginning, at the end, you might go a little bit less. In the middle, you go perhaps a little bit more. And you would go and you can work in their offices. You'd be able to be out and about in the city doing your field work. And students have also found it advantageous to be able to work at the WPI Seaport offices, which is a great location. It's a 5-minute walk from the commuter rail station in South Station. And they have high-speed internet access and everything. It's really great. So the commuter rail takes about an hour, and when you go each way. And then the other days you'd work in Worcester. You'd work off campus, so not on campus because this is an off-campus project. And the place you work in Worcester is downtown Worcester at the Worcester Community Project Center. So where the students doing their Worcester projects normally work. So like other project centers, you'd be working full-time on the projects, which roughly 40 to 50 hours a week, depending on the point in the term. And of course, at the end of the term, everybody works more and works harder. So while you're in Boston, as I said, you get to collaborate with the sponsor. You be at their offices or the Seaport offices of WPI. In terms of health and safety in Boston, health and safety, you're in the United States, you're in a place that's similar to Worcester. So all the kinds of health and safety considerations that you would have in Worcester, you'd also want to follow in Boston about staying in a group, supporting each other, not going to sketchy areas, things like that. Probably the biggest dangers in Boston are being a pedestrian and being injured by a car or a bicycle, and probably maybe pickpockets in some areas. So the main thing is you're doing your projects, right? So what are the projects all about? The project themes or opportunities that we tend to focus on in Worcester have to do with environmental resources, management, and sustainability. We always have sponsors that are asking students to work on projects that are important, that have meaning to them, that they would really love to have done, but don't have the resources, staff, or time to do themselves. Often the projects are not focused exclusively in the Boston area or one of the cities around Boston, for example, Cambridge or Chelsea. Often we're working with state agencies that have an interest in projects that are across the state. So sometimes students have an opportunity to go do field work in other places in the state, day trips, for example. Sometimes those are in central Massachusetts, but we've also had students go out to western Massachusetts on occasionally, or down even to the South Shore, to New Bedford. The sponsors tend to be highly engaged, and they're going to push the projects, and the sponsors are going to push the boundaries of your skills and knowledge. And I think that's one of the really great things about doing the IQP is you get to build those skills and that knowledge, and we certainly give you opportunities to do that. So some of the opportunities then, if you're looking forward, are to connect with state, federal government people, people at NGOs in Boston. If you're interested in looking for jobs or internships, you get to meet people. You learn about policy making at the local, the state level around issues, topics, problems that connect to engineering and sustainability. And you get familiar with Boston if you're not already. And if you are, then you get to have opportunities to do even more there. So some of the topics for our projects, generally sustainability, but also energy and water resources. For example, about microgrids or solar energy and cleaning up contaminated sites. Climate change adaptation, we've had a lot of projects about those, especially around Boston Harbor, but also about extreme heat, sort of heat waves in Chelsea. Public health and social services, and around urban planning and environmental justice. The sponsors, as I said, come from state agencies like the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, City of Boston, City of Chelsea, which is just across the harbor. This year we have the Boston Harbor Islands National Park as a sponsor. I'm having a team do some work on citizen science and climate change. And some of the NGOs we've worked with are Boston Harbor Now, that focus on maintaining Boston Harbor, but also thinking about climate change. Green Roots, which is an environmental justice and community advocacy group in Chelsea, and climbable.org, which focuses on the use of microgrids around the state. So as I said, Paul Matheson and I are the Project Center co-directors. If you'd like more information, please contact us. We're available via email. But you can also look at a couple of websites. WPI created an immersion Project Center video that's available about Boston, the Boston Project Center. So if you just Google WPI Project Immersion Boston, you will find it. It's a long website URL here. And also we have our own project website, as you can see, and you can find that link in the global portal. So thanks for listening, and I hope you'll apply to Boston. It's a great and exciting opportunity for IQPs.